Lowe's has the Labor Day deals you need to give your home a new look. Buy one, get one free select interior paint via Visa gift card rebate. Then, add the final touch with 2 for $8 on select 2.5 or 3-quart mums. Refresh your home and save big while doing it. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 9/3. Mums offer in-store only. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. More terms and restrictions apply. See Lowes.com/rebates for details.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. You're listening to episode 2 of our special series, The Dark Record, a deep dive into 60 of the world's strangest, most unsettling historical mysteries. Today, we journey to the heart of Central Asia, into the blue, shadowed mausoleum of a brutal conqueror, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, whose tomb is said to hold a deadly curse. This isn't just a story about bones and old stones. It's a tale that links centuries of conquest, folklore, and even one of the most devastating invasions in modern history. A tale where archaeology meets apocalypse. Let's begin where all good ghost stories do, at the grave. To understand the weight of the curse, we need to understand the man behind it. Timur, or Tamerlane, was born in the 14th century near what is now Uzbekistan. Though not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, Timur styled himself as a successor to the Mongol emperor's brutal legacy, and he lived up to it. Over the course of his life, Timur carved out an empire stretching from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Entire cities were wiped from the map. Mass executions and forced relocations became the norm. It's estimated that as many as 17 million people may have died as a result of his campaigns, about 5% of the world's population. To his enemies, Timur was death incarnate. But to his people, he was a bringer of order, a patron of architecture, and a symbol of divine strength. He saw himself as chosen, destined to rule, and feared in both life and death. Timur died in 1405 during a campaign to conquer Ming China. His body was brought back to Samarkand, the capital of his empire, and buried in an elaborate mausoleum called the Gur-e-Amar, a name that means Tomb of the King. The structure itself is a masterpiece of Islamic architecture, a soaring dome covered in deep blue tiles, flanked by intricate calligraphy and patterns that glint in the desert sun. But the beauty of the tomb masked something darker. From the moment it was completed, the Gur-e-Amar mausoleum was no ordinary burial site. It was revered, yes, but also feared. Generations of caretakers passed down warnings that disturbing Timur's tomb would bring disaster. These weren't just whispers in the wind. According to local legend, a curse was inscribed upon Timur's grave marker, buried deep within the chamber that held his remains. The warning supposedly read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Another version of the inscription, reportedly carved directly into the casket, is even more specific. "Whosoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." For centuries, the grave remained sealed. No one dared to test the warning until the 20th century, when modern science and Soviet ambition collided with ancient superstition. By the 1940s, the Soviet Union had developed an interest in the anthropology of its diverse peoples. The goal was to build a cohesive historical narrative, to understand the roots of their vast empire and, perhaps, to use those roots for propaganda. In 1941, a Soviet archaeological team was sent to Samarkand. Leading the group was Mikhail Gerasimov, a pioneering scientist known for his work in facial reconstruction from skulls. He had successfully recreated the faces of famous Russian czars and other historical figures. Now, his team turned its attention to Timur. The local elders reportedly pleaded with the team not to open the tomb. They warned them of the curse, but the scientists ignored the warnings. Superstition, after all, had no place in Soviet ideology. On June 19, 1941, Timur's tomb was opened. Inside, the team discovered not only Timur's body, but also the remains of two of his descendants. Gerasimov went to work, photographing the bones and preparing for the facial reconstruction. 3 days later, on June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, sending Nazi forces across the Soviet border in a surprise assault. From a historian's point of view, the timing might be chalked up to coincidence. Hitler had been planning the invasion for months. The political tensions were escalating. But for many, especially those in Central Asia, the coincidence was too perfect. Timur, the legendary bringer of death, had been disturbed, and the world was once again plunged into unimaginable violence. The legend of the curse was reborn, and it would only grow stronger in the weeks to come. When Mikhail Gerasimov's team opened Timur's tomb, they weren't just peeling back layers of earth and stone, they were stepping into something older, heavier, and more unsettling than they could have imagined. Hidden beneath the radiant Gur-e-Amr mausoleum was a burial vault steeped not only in reverence, but in centuries of whispered warnings. The Soviet mission was framed as science. Gerasimov, a pioneer in facial reconstruction, had built a reputation by recreating the likenesses of Russian czars and legendary figures from fragments of skull and bone. Timur, long mythologized in Central Asia, was his next subject. The expedition's goal: to analyze Timur's remains and reveal his face to the modern world. But science didn't shield the team from the atmosphere inside the tomb. Inside the chamber, the team discovered 3 sets of remains. The central sarcophagus, crafted from dark jade and wrapped in silence, held the body of Timur. To one side lay his grandson, the astronomer Ulugh Beg. A third skeleton, possibly a military commander or relative, rested nearby. As Gerasimov examined the bones, he identified signs that aligned with historical accounts. Timur had a shortened right leg and a stiffened arm, evidence of old battle injuries. His limp and partially disabled limb had been part of his legend. Now, the legend was confirmed in bone. Still, what should have been a triumph of science became something else. Unease rippled through the team. Local elders hadn't just warned of bad luck, they spoke of calamity, even war, if the tomb was opened. And within 3 days, catastrophe arrived. June 22, 1941. The morning of June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. Without warning, Hitler's forces stormed across the Soviet border in a campaign of shock and devastation. Rail lines were destroyed, cities burned. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were killed or captured in a matter of days. For many across Central Asia, the cause wasn't debated. Timur had been disturbed. The curse had been fulfilled. Officially, the Kremlin dismissed the timing as coincidence. Hitler's plans had been developing for months, perhaps years. But behind closed doors, questions grew. Even Stalin, deeply skeptical of superstition, reportedly began to reflect on the decision to open the tomb. The scientists did not escape untouched. Several members of Gerasimov's team fell ill in the following months. Others described vivid nightmares or unexplained anxiety. Though these claims were never officially documented, later testimonies suggest that many on the team came to regret their participation. Some believe the expedition had violated more than cultural taboos, it had upset a balance they didn't understand. For those in Samarkand, the strange timing wasn't just eerie, it was proof. If the curse had been triggered, could it be reversed? By 1942, the war was turning into a prolonged bloodbath. With the Battle of Stalingrad looming on the horizon, Soviet leadership faced pressure not just from the front lines, but from growing public fear. Whether driven by propaganda, remorse, or desperation, the Soviet government made a remarkable decision. Timur's remains would be reburied, and not just returned to the mausoleum, they would be laid to rest in accordance with Islamic rites. It was a startling shift for a secular, atheistic regime. Funeral prayers were read. Rituals of purification were followed. Muslim clerics were brought in to oversee the reinterment. It was an act of cultural and spiritual appeasement, an attempt to undo what had been done. The reburial took place quietly in late 1942. Weeks later, the tide of war shifted. In early 1943, Soviet forces delivered a stunning defeat to the German army at Stalingrad, the first major turning point of the war. Coincidence again? Maybe. But across Central Asia, the story had already written itself. Even now, no peer-reviewed study links Timur's exhumation to Hitler's invasion. Historians remain divided. Some dismiss the story entirely. Others acknowledge it as a fascinating case of cultural fear intersecting with modern warfare. But in Samarkand, the events are remembered differently. They speak of the day the tomb was opened and the world caught fire. And they speak of how the dead, once disturbed, were finally laid to rest, and how, soon after, the fires began to recede. Because for those who live in Timur's shadow, the lesson was never about bones or empires. It was about listening. Long before Soviet boots stepped into Timur's tomb in 1941, the warnings were already echoing, carried not on paper, but in memory. Passed from elder to child in mosques, bazaars, and across generations, the legend of Timur's curse wasn't an invention of war. It was ancient, deeply rooted, and taken seriously. It wasn't about superstition, it was tradition. A belief so tightly woven into the fabric of Samarkand that for centuries, no one dared cross it. Timur's death in 1405 marked the end of a reign soaked in conquest and blood. His empire spanned from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. But even after his campaigns ended, Timur's legacy didn't rest. He became mythologized not just for his brutality, but for the awe he inspired. His name carried weight in life and fear in death. From the moment he was buried in the Gur-i-Amur mausoleum, stories began to circulate. People believed the warlord's spirit was protected, not just by marble and mosaic, but by something older, something sacred. Disturbing his rest, the legend said, would bring not just misfortune, but destruction. Some claimed Timur left the warning himself. Others believed the curse was chanted into the stone by Sufi mystics, or written into the very design of the tomb. Few agreed on the source, but all agreed on the consequences. By the time the Soviets arrived, those beliefs were still alive. Locals didn't just caution against opening the crypt, they pleaded, The gur-e-emor wasn't just a tomb, it was a symbol. Built in the Timurid style, its brilliant blue dome and ornate walls drew not just the eye, but reverence. Inside, the air was still. Light filtered through latticed windows in soft, flickering beams. Visitors lowered their voices without meaning to, and in Islam, disturbing the dead is no small thing. Though Timur himself wasn't known for piety, his resting place was still bound by religious and cultural laws. It had remained sealed for over 5 centuries. So when the Soviet team arrived in 1941 with cameras, tools, and academic credentials, the tension was immediate. Elders warned them plainly. "Do not open the tomb," they said. "If you do, war will follow." It wasn't metaphor, it was prophecy. And days later, as German tanks rolled into Soviet territory, that prophecy felt fulfilled. After the invasion began, the timeline spread like wildfire. June 19th, tomb opened. June 22nd, war ignites. The eerie proximity sparked more than whispers, it ignited belief. People who had been dismissed for clinging to folklore were now viewed as bearers of ancient truth. Even those who didn't believe in curses couldn't help but wonder. Military officers and civilians alike started retelling the timeline over and over until it became something deeper than coincidence. When the Soviet government reburied Timur the following year with full Islamic rites, and when victory at Stalingrad followed shortly after, the story only grew stronger. The curse had been triggered. Then it had been soothed. What keeps Timur's curse alive isn't just the sequence of events, it's what the story represents. It reminds us that some lines, no matter how old, shouldn't be crossed without consequence. That belief, more than fear, gives the legend its staying power. Not everything buried is meant to be uncovered. Not every truth must be dissected. And sometimes even modern regimes must bow to older warnings. In Samarkand today, tour guides still speak of the tomb with caution. They point to the jade cenotaph and explain how history shifted after it was disturbed. And they do it not for drama, but because they believe it. To them, this isn't just history, it's a living warning. And in the soft silence beneath the gur-e-emor's dome, that warning still lingers. Long after Timur was returned to his tomb, the legend refused to be buried with him. In the decades following World War II, the story of the so-called curse rippled outward, told in books, documentaries, and whispered through museum corridors and television specials. It traveled far beyond Uzbekistan. What began as a regional legend became global folklore. The chilling timing of 1941 to 1942 was simply too precise to ignore. Hitler's invasion just days after Timur's tomb was opened was one of the deadliest military campaigns in human history. Its proximity to the exhumation fueled questions that haven't fully died down. Skeptics call it coincidence. They point out that Hitler had been planning Operation Barbarossa for months, maybe longer. To them, it's dramatic but not mystical. But others, historians, folklorists, and spiritual thinkers alike, see something different. They argue that ancient legends often carry fragments of truth, passed down through generations not as facts, but as warnings. And when those warnings appear to come true, even the most rational minds take notice. It's not about proving the curse, it's about respecting what it represents. The tale of Timur's tomb has made its way into pop culture in subtle ways. You'll find it mentioned alongside other so-called cursed discoveries. The themes are familiar: curiosity opens a door, and something dark slips through. Paranormal documentaries have given the curse airtime, sometimes as brief segments, sometimes as central stories. Even during the Soviet era, state-controlled media occasionally reference the events carefully, never endorsing the curse, but never fully dismissing it either. Western media, too, has kept the legend alive. It's been cited in conspiracy forums, fringe books, and discussions about ancient energy and spiritual boundaries. And through it all, the core of the story has stayed surprisingly consistent. A tomb is opened, a war begins, the dead are reburied, the war shifts. In Samarkand, the Gur-e-Amur mausoleum continues to draw thousands of visitors each year. Some come for the architecture, others come for the legend. Local guides often tell the story, not as a sales pitch, but as a matter of cultural memory. They speak of the 3-day gap between the tomb's opening and the invasion. They point to the jade cenotaph and lower their voices, honoring the atmosphere. Some recount how cameras malfunctioned during the 1941 exhumation, or how researchers grew mysteriously ill. None of it is formally documented, but that's not the point. The power of the story doesn't lie in scientific validation, it lies in how deeply it's believed. Even in academic circles, Timur's curse is sometimes raised not as evidence of the supernatural, but as a case study in cultural ethics. It's used to teach students and researchers what can happen when science brushes too carelessly against tradition. It's not about ghosts, it's about humility. The legend reminds us that progress without respect can leave scars, that some questions aren't worth asking, that ancient spaces hold more than just artifacts, they carry the weight of memory, belief, and identity. So what are we to make of the curse of Timur? Was it a real force, capable of shaping global events? Or was it folklore, amplified by coincidence, tragedy, and fear? Maybe it was never meant to be one or the other. Maybe it's both, because belief, once ignited, is hard to extinguish. And whether you see it as myth or message, the story endures quietly, watching from under a sapphire dome. The tomb remains sealed. The war ended long ago, but the warning, like a faint breath on the wind, still lingers.
Save big during Labor Day at Lowe's. Get up to 40% off select major appliances. Plus, buy more to get up to an additional 20% off. Shop even more savings with 3 Stay Green 1 cubic foot vegetable and flower garden soil bags for $10. This Labor Day, take care of your home for less at Lowe's. We help, you save. Valid through 9/3. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. Select locations only. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.
And that brings us to the end of episode 2 of The Dark Record. We've unearthed the eerie legacy of Timur, the powerful warlord whose tomb remains one of the most mysterious and feared burial sites in the world. We've explored the historical facts, the chilling timing of global conflict, and the layers of myth that have cemented this story in modern legend. Whether you believe in curses or not, the tale of Timur's tomb stands as a haunting reminder that the past is never truly at rest and that history has a long memory. Join us next time as we turn to another strange, unsettling chapter from the archives of time, the bizarre outbreak known as the Dancing Plague of 1518. It's a story of mass hysteria, music, madness, and death, and it might be one of the weirdest episodes in European history. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also check out photos and episode extras over at thehalloweenpodcast.com or our Facebook page, facebook.com/thehalloweenpodcast. Thanks for listening, stay curious, and maybe let the dead sleep. Have a good night.